What's happening in Utah in 2024? Well, in this video, I'm explaining exactly the top issues, the top things that are happening in the state of Utah in 2024. So it doesn't really matter if you're considering moving to Utah and you're looking for a good place to live, or perhaps you already live here, or perhaps you're a native and maybe you've lived here your entire life like me. But regardless, in this video, I'm breaking down the top 8 things that are happening in the state of Utah in 2024, and I'm keeping the best for last. The one single thing that is the greatest threat to the state of Utah is the thing that I'm talking about last here, and I'm really passionate about. So if you're curious what that is, stick around to the end because it's the #1 threat to Utah's future in my opinion, as well as many others. So with that said, let's jump right in. Okay, first things first, the first thing I want to talk about that's happening in Utah in 2024 is something that I've labeled as downtown rising. Rising downtown Salt Lake City because it's growing up right before my eyes. I've lived in Salt Lake City almost my entire life, and I've seen it grow from just a small city into what is now considered a great mid-sized city in the United States. But what I'm noticing more than anything is just in the last handful of years, the city has grown tremendously. In fact, the number of residential units in downtown Salt Lake City has more than doubled in just a few short years. But something that's currently happening in 2024 is the completion of Utah's new tallest building in the Astra Tower, which sits at just over 450 feet tall, which I understand if you're coming from a major city elsewhere outside of Utah, that is not a really tall building, but it really is something for the state of Utah where we've limited the height of our buildings in Salt Lake City simply because we've had the space to grow outward. Well, as the decades have progressed, we've pretty much run out of a lot of room to grow outward, and so therefore things are starting to grow upward. And with that comes change to not only downtown Salt Lake City, but other areas as well, including the suburbs that sit around Salt Lake City. So Utah's new tallest building, the Astra Tower, it's a residential tower that has some fairly affordable units, to be honest with you, but they really have taken advantage of the south-facing and the eastern-facing views of the picturesque Wasatch Mountains. But the Astra Tower is not the only thing that's changing downtown. We've seen so much change over the last handful of years, including numerous buildings that have popped up. Another building that's going to be completed is the Worthington Tower, which is another residential tower of about 359 residential units. And ultimately, what this means for the downtown area of Salt Lake City is that many people are choosing to make Salt Lake City, and specifically downtown Salt Lake City, a new way of life. That's something that's been a little bit lacking in previous years, but it's a new way of life for people here in Utah. And the city is growing up right before my eyes. But as we look around throughout Salt Lake City, including the downtown area, there are developments that have popped up everywhere. There are new restaurants, there are new hotels, there are new residential towers and mixed commercial use as well. And a lot of the city blocks that we've seen that have looked a little dilapidated over the years because the use of those particular spaces have kind of diminished over time, those areas have been revitalized and new growth is coming in and making this city a more thriving and bustling place. In fact, if you're in downtown Salt Lake City on a given weeknight, excluding nights where the Utah Jazz might be playing, just basically there's not really a major event happening in any way, shape, or form, the city still has people all over the place walking around, visiting different shops, and of course, the dining options as well. And this is something that's fairly new to Utah. Salt Lake City has not been the type of city that you would move to for its nightlife, for its bars, for any of those things, but it's really cool to see that Salt Lake City is alive and well, but it's changing dramatically, and along with that comes some friction from the locals especially. A lot of local people are reaching out to me through comments on my YouTube channel, which I completely relate to and understand, and they hate to see the city grow up and become something that doesn't look so familiar to them as the city that once was. And so I understand both perspectives, but change is inevitable, and of course people are choosing to move here, and that is one of the reasons why this city and this state are growing up tremendously. So with that changing skyline of downtown Salt Lake City also comes the change in the perspective of some of the people, including the locals, not only as to what Salt Lake City is becoming, but what Salt Lake City no longer is. Salt Lake City is no longer that small little city in the West. It's growing up right before our eyes, and it's something that we need to embrace and understand, but also manage as well. So 2024 is the culmination of many of these developments and projects that have been in the works for a handful of years up to this point. and it's really cool to see these projects being completed and construction coming to an end. Okay, number 2 on the list of things that are happening in Utah in 2024 pertains to my favorite college football team, and that's the University of Utah. The University of Utah is joining the Big 12 Conference this year officially and begins play this fall in the Big 12. It's been really cool to see the journey of the University of Utah make its way from the Western Athletic Conference and then into the Mountain West and then the Pac-12 and of course now into the Big 12. College football is changing and driving the changes with conference realignment throughout the entire country, which of course football is the cash cow in terms of which of these sports is creating the most revenue, but it's cool to see Utah adapt and move along with that change and not get left behind. The University of Utah has built a legacy around its football team and of course with the staff and the coaches that come along with that, but the University of Utah is so much more than just a football team. It has many other great sports teams and history. Even though our basketball team has been in the pits for quite some time, it does have other things that are really sticking out. But aside from athletics, the University of Utah is a phenomenal research school as well. And it's cool to see this place really grow up and align with the Big 12 Conference. As a local Utahn, it's really cool as well to see that the University of Utah will join the same conference as their rival to the south in Brigham Young University. It's almost been kind of a shame that they haven't been in the same conference for quite some time now, so it's really cool and exciting to see them get back into the same conference and keep that rivalry alive and well, because the Holy War, as we call it here in Utah, is one of the greatest experiences in terms of sporting events in the entire state of Utah. So if you haven't witnessed that, it's fun to look forward to. The BYU-Utah rivalry is so much fun, and I'm hoping that that rivalry continues for decades and decades to come. All right, next up in 2024 in Utah, one of the major concerns, not only for people that are locals and living in Utah, but those that are relocating to Utah as well, is the air quality here. Now, I've spoken and talked about extensively about what causes the winter inversions, but the air quality is not just a winter problem. Of course, other things factor into things as well, and when we have certain high pressure or low pressure weather patterns passing through, sometimes in the summertime, we get stuck with the smoke and the haze from other wildfires that are happening in California or in the Northwest or even from Canada at times. And so it's not just a winter problem. Air quality is of paramount importance here because the entire Wasatch Front that sits right on the front of this mountain range kind of sits in an area where you would consider kind of a bowl. In other words, there's no escape for that air, and we need to make sure that the air continues to come through, clean out that smog, and make sure that we have clean, healthy air to breathe. Now, I was really curious after reading so many of your comments right here on some of my videos where people were commenting how much worse the air quality has become over the years. I've actually done my research and I've looked through the data from the EPA to determine if that is true. And guess what, guys? It's not. The air quality in Utah has dramatically improved since the 1990s. And of course, it's not linear. There are some years that are better than others, but overall, it has dramatically improved. And I think that that partially has to do with cleaner burning vehicles, but also the shutdown of some of the operations that were causing a massive amount of the pollution, including Geneva Steele down in Utah County. So when I look at the air quality today, and the trajectory that we're on, it looks as though we've improved quite a ways, but I don't think that that's a reason to be complacent and not understand how crucial it is to continue to improve our air quality. And perhaps the solutions involve regulating those industries that are polluting the air the most, and perhaps electric vehicle use and the adoption of electric vehicles will definitely improve this as well. But I'm hoping that over time we can continue to make air pollution and air quality a top priority and make sure that we're giving our children and grandchildren in the future better air to breathe than what we have today. And one of the interesting data points that I found was ranking the top 203 metropolitan areas across the United States, and Utah sat right smack dab in the middle at 100. And I'm hoping that we continue to improve in this area because it's of paramount importance, and of course, it's a major concern, not only for those who live here or who have relocated here, but for those that are choosing to move here and make this their home as well. All right, next up on the list is something that's talked about each and every summer, and that is water conservation. Some people believe that we have plenty of water. Some people think that we're drying up and that we're all going to die because we don't have enough water. The truth is, we do have a plan in place. We have the resources available to us. And luckily, over these last couple of years, we've had phenomenal snowpack, which feeds our reservoir system and provides us with the culinary water that we need to sustain life along the Wasatch Front and throughout Utah. What is crucial is how do we tap into additional resources? How do we tap into groundwater, and plenty of groundwater, mind you, but how do we tap into those resources and make sure that we're managing them well so that we're not drying up and leaving our future dependent on each and every winter to make sure that that snowfall provides the water that we need for that coming year. And while on this topic, let's talk about the Great Salt Lake. It's been in the news the last few years how much the Great Salt Lake has shrunk and how much it's drying up, which is definitely true, but over these last couple of years, the Great Salt Lake has been restored to a degree that's a little safer, quite a bit healthier, and it's super important that we save the Great Salt Lake, because if that lake bed dries up and completely dries out, and that lake bed becomes airborne through dust, it is going to be terrible for the people that live here along the Wasatch Front, because there are so many problems with what's in that lake bed, including arsenic. So the best way to look at this is if that lake were to dry up, the Wasatch Front would likely become completely uninhabitable. So we cannot allow that to happen. And the way that Utah's natural resource of water works is we have these beautiful Wasatch Mountains right in our backyard. We depend on that snowfall each and every winter to provide the snowpack that when spring arrives will provide the runoff to fill up all of our many reservoirs up in the mountains that will then in turn provide us with the water that we need to sustain life throughout the year. If that snowfall does not continue to happen, and those reservoirs dry up, we don't have the water that we need. But also, when there's enough water to not only fill up those reservoirs, the systems of rivers come down from the mountains from those reservoirs and feed into Utah Lake to the south and also the Great Salt Lake. Now, the water that gets to the Great Salt Lake comes from Utah Lake via the Jordan River, or it comes up from the north from the Weber River, from the Bear River, from the rivers up in the northern Wasatch area. So if we're not allowing that water to ultimately end up in the Great Salt Lake, that lake will continue to dry up, and we cannot let that happen. The interesting thing is, when I was just a small child, I remember my grandfather taking me to go look at some pumps that Governor Norm Bangerter had ordered to provide for the Great Salt Lake to be used to pump the water out of the lake and out into the West Desert because the lake was too full and it was flooding places. And so just during my lifetime, we've gone from having a lake that's flooding to a lake that's been crucially low in its levels, and hopefully this last couple of years continues to bring that lake back to a very healthy level for not only our future, but for the future of Utah. All right, number 5 on the list is really exciting. It's something that I created a video about just a couple of months ago when news broke, but that is the NHL is coming to Utah. Utah has been home to the Utah Jazz for decades now, and home to Real Salt Lake, our other major sports team here. But for yet another professional sports team to make its home here in Utah is really exciting for those that are from Utah. Even if you're not a really big hockey fan, hockey is just an incredibly fun sport to experience, especially if you go to the games. And oftentimes people talk about, well, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. But in reality, hockey is a beautiful sport, and I'm hoping that we can really create a home for this NHL team and come up with an identity that is unique to Utah. In doing this, Ryan Smith, the owner of not only the Utah Jazz, but the new NHL hockey team, has put out to public vote to find out what we want to name this team. And of course, there have been many names talked about, including the Outlaws, the Blizzard. There's so many others, but one of the things that's sticking out to most people is the potential name of the Utah Yeti or the Utah Yetis. I prefer the Utah Yeti over the Yetis, but that's just me. And I'm hoping that that becomes the team name, but time will tell. But in the fall of 2024, this team will make its presence known and play its very first games here in Utah in the Delta Center, sharing the same exact arena as the NBA's Utah Jazz. And they very well may just start out the season known as the Utah Hockey Club, at least as a placeholder for the first year, but we'll see how this plays out based on what Ryan Smith is doing through the polls, as well as all of the work on the back end that goes into branding a new sports franchise. Needless to say, I'm super excited for this because it's been really fun to see the Jazz throughout my entire life as something that I've latched onto, and it's cool that young people today will be able to not only latch onto the Utah Jazz, but also an NHL hockey team. And in the future, perhaps maybe we get a Major League Baseball team as well. This is something that's been proposed. In fact, a bill was passed along with another bill to provide some funding to help make that happen. And as a Major League Baseball fan, a baseball fanatic, I'm hoping that we can get a Major League Baseball team here as well, but time will tell. That very well may rely on expansion as opposed to relocation. We'll find out over time if that's going to happen. I think the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty good. I would probably place it in the 70 to 80% likely range, but only time will tell. All right, next up on the list is number 6, and that is the potential and likelihood, in my opinion, of the confirmation of Utah being host to the 2034 Winter Olympic Games. And while the 2034 Olympics are still a complete decade away, but it is July 23rd, 2024, the eve to the Paris Summer Olympics this year, where they will confirm and announce who will be the host city for the 2034 Winter Games, and Salt Lake City is a clear frontrunner. I personally hope that we do get the Olympics. I saw the Olympics come here in 2002, and of course, many local people may not love the idea of having the Olympics here to begin with, or have the Olympics here again, but the Olympics provided the catapult for Utah's economy to kind of step into the limelight and become a little bit less of a secret place. And it's precisely following those 2002 Olympics where Utah really started to take off in growth, not only here in Salt Lake City, but along the entire Wasatch Front and the Wasatch Back. So for me personally, why do I want the 2034 Olympic Games to be hosted here in Salt Lake City, in my home city? I think it's obviously fun to see these events take place, but it will bring other things with it. And some people are not all for that. Some people don't want the state of Utah to grow much more. In fact, a lot of the comments that I'm reading, and I totally hear you. If you're a local here in Utah, I completely sympathize, and I understand that many of you do not want this state to grow anymore because you're not wanting to see the state become something that it's not currently or that it hasn't been in the past. But the 2034 Olympic Games are just something that I'm super excited about. I love the Olympics. I love watching the Olympics, and I'm hoping that my children can experience that as well, just as I did back in 2002. All right, next up on the list, number 7, Utah in 2024 is yet again the number 1 state in the country. In fact, I just created a video recently outlining why and what criteria were used to determine that Utah is again ranked as the number 1 state in the country. I've also read hundreds and hundreds of comments right here throughout my YouTube channel and on some of those videos where they don't want people to move here. In fact, tons of people are posting comments like, don't move here, there's nothing to look at here, it sucks here, it's terrible, just move on. Find a different place. And I can relate to that. I get it. I understand. And so when people say those things, I completely empathize. I understand it. I get it. Sometimes it's in jest or sarcasm, and other times people are really sincerely not wanting people to move here. But in essence, we have full freedom in this country to move wherever we want to. And it's my duty and my responsibility as a real estate professional here to make sure that people are being educated in the way that they can to make the best choice for them. And I view that as my responsibility in serving people that are watching my videos here as well. So if you're looking to relocate to Utah, please reach out to me. You can find my information in the description below, or you can click that link in the pinned comment on this and every video. But in essence, if Utah is going to continue to be the number 1 state in the country, along with that comes other challenges. And while it might seem difficult to become the best or the top rated state in the country, it's probably even more difficult to stay at the top. So what is Utah going to continue to do to make sure that it can manage all of the growth, to make sure that its economic outlook is just as strong tomorrow as it is today, to make sure that people are not left behind and can actually have the same opportunities in future generations that we've had in previous? So that's something I'm really passionate about. Not just seeing Utah as the top ranked state in the country, but I really want this state to stay at the top. How do we stay at the top? We manage our resources well. We manage the growth well. We manage everything that comes along with it, including the challenges, the difficulties, the homelessness, the traffic, the congestion, and all those things that come into play. How do we best manage that for Utah's future and families? And a big part of that solution is you and I. And I know that doesn't seem like much, but when all of us play our specific role in making this a great place to live, we are all going to experience what Utah truly has to offer, and that is a magnificent and the best place to live in the entire country. All right, last but not least, I promised this one to be last, and I believe that this thing that is happening in 2024 is the number 1 threat to Utah's future, and that is our housing affordability crisis. What are we doing to make sure that homes and housing is just as attainable and affordable for families in the future as they were for us in the past? That's something I'm super passionate about. In fact, the state legislature created an arsenal of new tools to encourage increased supply of attainable homes. And when I say attainable, I'm putting quotation marks around that. Attainable is different depending on your perspective. But in this context, we're aiming for prices that are closer to $350,000 to $400,000. And my question is, will it actually make a difference? Yes, I'd love to see passionate lawmakers bring up and talk about affordable housing and how this crisis is our greatest threat to Utah's future. And I love seeing them pass these bills. But the question is, will this actually make a difference? And while I generally am a pretty optimistic person, I tend to not be very pessimistic at all. It's something that I can't quite hop on board with in terms of, is this actually going to make a difference? And while lawmakers are really ecstatic about what's happening and the bills that are passing to make this a reality, I hope that I can share that same vision, and let's see how this year plays out to see how these programs actually make a difference. Rather than pump $150 million towards a program that Governor Cox's administration originally pitched with a goal to build 35,000 new starter homes by 2028, the Utah legislature and the governor's office worked together to pass a package of bills that focus less on subsidies and more on free market policies. They created a new slate of tools cities and developers can use to pay for infrastructure and other needs, hoping to pave the way and create more affordable single-family units throughout not only Salt Lake City, but throughout the entire state. So what are those specific bills? There's HB 476, which outlines exactly what cities have to do when new development proposals come into play. It's going to streamline the process for developers and builders. And when people here locally hear of developers lining their pockets, of course, I understand that some people don't think that that's a good idea, but ultimately, the greatest threat to the state is housing affordability. If we do not build more homes, or if more people don't leave the state than come into the state, this state will only get worse and worse and worse in terms of its housing affordability. So are people choosing to leave Utah at a greater rate than people are choosing to come here? Absolutely not, because we've created the best place in the entire country, in my opinion, and as the rankings show, we have the #1 state in the country. Of course, we're going to attract more people here. And in doing so, we have the responsibility to provide the infrastructure, to provide the means for developers to build the right number of units to make sure that these people have a place to live, but also the locals have a place to live as well. Because when people move in from out of state and they purchase up our homes, that means we have fewer homes for us. And that means the price is driven up. And I want to point out here, above all, that Utah's affordable housing crisis is set out to worsen throughout 2024. In fact, the data shared from the University of Utah's Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute reflect that we're going to increase the shortage of homes in Utah by 37,000 additional units in shortage just this year alone. In other words, we need to ramp up building. We need to ramp up the ability for developers and builders to ramp up production. We need to make sure that these areas have the infrastructure in place, that the cities can approve these developments and make sure that we're doing so responsibly. And so in my opinion, most of these bills really pertain to the cities, because the people who live in cities and the cities themselves typically adopt a mentality of not in my backyard. They don't want to see all of this growth and all of these things take place just in their backyard. But I'm hoping and I'm questioning, are enough cities going to get on board and actually make a difference? Because it's going to take a group effort. It's not going to happen just by Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs doing this, or in St. George, or up in Syracuse. It needs to be the entire Wasatch Front working together, the different municipalities, to make sure that we provide the housing that our residents need. And residents are not only locals who have lived here their entire lives, new residents come into play. So if you're looking to make the move to Utah, just know we do have houses here, but the prices have gone up tremendously because we can't keep up with the growth. And when I say that, I'm really talking about Utah's future. And so if we get right on top of this in 2024 and in the coming years, we will be able to provide a better future for all Utahns and keep those prices at a point where we can all reach the goal of homeownership. And Utah is something I'm incredibly passionate about. If you're considering making the move to Utah, I would love to be your real estate resource of choice. Hit me up. You can find my information in the description or click that link in the pinned comment. Let's get in touch and let's talk about how we can specifically help you make the move to Utah. And if you're looking to learn more about life in Utah, check out this playlist next. And until next time, thanks.